welcome to Maker's Bar. I'm your host, Troy Goldenberg. Today I'm here with Sarah Raviani. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She's a visiting fellow at the National Union for Democracy in Iran. I'm very excited to be able to talk to her, to hear her journey, her story, what she is working on, and maybe if we have time, some current events in Iran. So, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here and to discuss with you all about Iran and my personal story. So thank you again for having me.
Of course, very excited. I followed you on Twitter now for a while, or X for a while, so very excited to be able to talk to you. And yeah, let's start there. Let's start with your personal journey, wherever you want to begin that journey.
So I am of Iranian descent. So my journey begins from when I was a child. A lot of Iranians are just very political in nature. We sit, at least my family, we would sit around the dinner table talking about Iranian politics, about, current events inside of Iran. And that's how I grew up. That's how I was, raised. It was always having these political discussions. So my parents really did help shape the person that I am today. Whether they like it or not, I don't think that they ever expected it to, go this far. And for me to get as involved in politics as I ended up becoming. But that's kind of where it started for me. I was very politically aloof most of my life. I was not involved in politics. I did not consider myself a political person. But in 2022, after the murder of Mahsa Amini by the regime in Iran, it really just, the only way I can describe it is that it set my soul on fire. Like I just said, we sit around the dinner table and talk politics in the Raviani home. And I remember on this specific day, I was walking in and I was about to go out and leave and go to the gym. And my dad looked at me and he said, "Sarah, they killed another girl." And he said, "She was around your age." And at the time I was 23. And I remember just feeling like, wow, it happened again. And when you grow up as an Iranian, we see all of these issues, all of these young women and men who have been gone to the streets so courageously and ended up losing their lives fighting for freedom. And I just knew something was different this time because of the look in my dad's eyes when he said it. And I will never forget how he looked at me that night when he said, "She was around your age." And I was, like I said, heading out the door, and he just looked at me with the saddest eyes. And I was like, "Okay, I'm leaving. I'm going to the gym." And I was walking out and he called me back and he said, "Come give me a hug and a kiss." And my family were not very affectionate. And so I knew that, my dad was just, he was very upset about what had happened. And so I walked up to him, I gave him a kiss on the cheek, I hugged him, and I walked out. And still, it hadn't really set in for me the magnitude or the gravity of the situation that was about to unfold. But, in those following weeks after that moment, we saw the youth of Iran take to the streets, and they were chanting to overthrow the regime. And I had never seen scenes like that before out of Iran. I was staying up all night long to watch the footage, watch what was happening. And this was the first time that I feel like I was old enough to really grasp the situation at hand. And I saw so many young women that were all around my age and some even younger that had been killed just for protesting against the regime. These were non-violent protests. They were just young kids, just like me, who wanted a better future for themselves. And about a week or two into the uprising in Iran, I knew, okay, I have to start talking about this. I can't just let this be swept under the rug. And I saw that it was not getting the media coverage that I thought it deserved, and no one really knew what was happening. And I thought to myself, I was like, like I said, was very politically absent, and I was scared, to be quite honest. I didn't want to speak out against the regime because I knew the cost of it. It meant never returning to Iran. It meant safety concerns. It meant so many things. But I looked at those kids that were out in the streets and I said, they're facing bullets. They're facing something a million times worse than these trivial things that, I'm up against. And so I just started posting online and I started sharing their stories. I started talking about what was happening inside of Iran. And then by the end of 2022, I just felt like I had to do more. And I was like, okay, we were all kind of starting to put our heads together in the diaspora. We were like, what more can we do? And one space that was previously occupied by, groups and organizations that really did misrepresent the Iranian American diaspora was politics. We were, as a community, very largely absent in the US political discourse space. And it was very surprising for a lot of people, how absent the community was outside of these groups that I mentioned that were misrepresenting us. Because we are a very educated and wealthy diaspora, you would think that, along the line somewhere we would have gotten involved, but it was an empty space that we needed to fill a void in. And so I started advocating for legislation to hold the regime in Iran accountable. And I figured, what better way can I get involved and can I serve a greater purpose than to advocate for these concrete, tangible actions that can actually make a difference. And now when I made that decision, I had no idea at the time that it was going to turn into me moving halfway across the country to Washington, D.C. I had no idea that it was going to turn into everything that it turned into. But it just started with that idea and a few of us in the diaspora that put our heads together, like I said, and said, we're going to start advocating for legislation. And I had no idea what that meant at the time. I was still very young. Like I said, I was 23 and I didn't go to school for this. I didn't have any background in political or legislative advocacy. And so we just started building a team, basically, of grassroots activists. And we started advocating for a piece of legislation called the Massa Act, named after the young woman who was murdered in Iran. And we would do weekly Twitter spaces and we would put out weekly call lists. And what people would do was they would call their member of Congress and get them to co-sponsor the legislation. And at first, I remember our very first Twitter space, we had maybe less than 10 people listening to us. And I remember I was so nervous. I was shaking, my voice was shaking. I was so scared to be, to enter into this new realm because I was not on Twitter prior, or at least not for politics. And I remember just being like, oh my gosh, no one's listening. There's less than 10 people here. Like, how are we going to make this happen? Fast forward a few months, we develop like a huge network of Iranian American activists, and not even just Iranian Americans. We had people of non-Iranian descent. We had people of Israeli descent. The Jewish people were some of our biggest allies in all of this. And we built so many connections and made so much momentum very, very quickly. And to this day, when we talk about this political advocacy journey and how we got started, people even on Capitol Hill are like, we've never seen anything like this. It was incredible how we were able to mobilize and organize. And even some of the most, experienced staffers on Capitol Hill were simply like, oh my gosh, who are you guys? How did you guys do this? all they knew is that they were getting hundreds of calls every single week talking about Iran. And they're like, where did these people come from? And it kind of just showed the political muscle of the Iranian American community. Like I said earlier, we were very politically absent in the U.S. political realm. And then we just came out in full force. And after just a few months, from like, let's say January of 2023 to March of 2023, we had amassed to over 100 co-sponsors in the House, almost an even split. Democrats and Republicans had signed on to this legislation. It passed through the House, I mean, in record speed. By the summer, we passed the House, and it passed with 410 yes votes, only 3 no votes. And now we're in the Senate. We are 1 week out from an SFRC markup. I had meetings all day today on Capitol Hill advocating for this legislation. We kind of coined today as the calm before the storm, because tonight is the deadline for amendments on the language of the bill. And so we're just kind of like in a waiting game right now to kind of see what happens. But by tomorrow, we have more meetings lined up, and we're going to go and talk and kind of discuss, what amendments have been proposed to the legislation. And then by the 16th, April 16th, next week on Tuesday, there will be an SFRC markup, and we'll know if the bill is going to progress further. If it does, then we will hopefully see a Senate floor vote, and then hopefully the president will sign this bill into law. So it's been a very long journey. I've spent nearly 2 years working on this passion project of mine, and that's kind of how we got started to where we are today.
That's an amazing story. I had questions throughout it, but I just wanted to let you keep going. It's like, wow, that is an incredible story. And I think so many people around the world, but definitely got a little emotional because I could just relate to your story with your dad. I can relate to it so much where I've spoken with friends over the past several months who just break down crying because they think about, oh, that could have been my sister who was 19 and or 18 or 20, whatever it may be. And yeah, so I got emotional at the beginning of that too. But I want to focus on this bill in particular. What all is in the MASA Act? And yeah, can you dive down that a little bit?
Sure. So it aims to codify sanctions against the supreme leader and the president of Iran for committing human rights abuses and for supporting terrorism. They are already currently sanctioned under executive order, but we had seen under the Biden administration, when there was a desire to return to some sort of nuclear negotiations, there was talk of removing these sanctions. So this bill, these legislative sanctions, would basically force congressional oversight to determine the need to sanction these individuals and their offices, which would include additional individuals. And so that is what makes the MASA Act important. What makes it very special to our community is that it's named after Mahsa Amini, who was murdered by the regime. So I think there's several components at play here as to why this bill became so important to our community. But it is kind of like a first step for us. We saw how we were able to mobilize politically. We saw what it took. We made the connections with these congressional offices and even members of Congress themselves. And so that kind of is just like a very, very first step. And there's a lot more in store, I feel, for the Iranian American community. I think that this is just the very beginning, and I see a lot more political mobilization in the future. So that's kind of what the MASA Act is, what it does, and why it's so important to so many Iranians.
Thank you for explaining a bit more. And then I'm a little bit knowledgeable about Iran's recent history and the struggles your people are dealing with now. But for anyone that doesn't have any, let's say they're coming in blank slate here, can you describe, I don't really know a year to start. If you want to start in 2022, it'd probably be more appropriate to start a bit earlier. What the Iranian people are dealing with and what they're fighting for with the IRGC. If you can kind of go down that a little bit.
Absolutely. So in 1979, there was an Islamic revolution, and the Shah of Iran was overthrown, and a theocratic dictator was installed, Ayatollah Khomeini. And since then, the past 45 years, the people have been struggling under this dictatorship. And I think almost immediately following the revolution in 1979, there were protests very, very early on. People knew that it was a mistake, that the country was worse off under the mullahs. I only know, and I can only speak for my family specifically, but my family talks about, pre-revolution 1979, what beautiful lives they lived. And then all of a sudden it was uprooted and everything changed. And I was actually explaining to a friend this morning, it's, something silly, but it's interesting. My grandfather, once he came to America, he always wore ties. And he wanted to wear ties in Iran, and it was basically, forbidden after 1979. You think ties, like what, a man wearing a tie, how could that be, frowned upon or shameful? But it was because it was considered too Western. And so they basically wanted to just control every single aspect of the Iranian people's lives, from the men, in the way they dress, and also the women with the compulsory hijab. So things got very, very bad. And I would say I spoke about this earlier on, but over time, it's been coming to a head. People have become increasingly fed up with the regime. And there have been protests. I remember as early on as 2009, that was the first time I really was old enough to kind of understand what was happening inside of Iran. And I remember my mom being glued to the TV, and I remember her just staring and watching and wondering why no one was talking about what was happening to the people of Iran. It started off as protests against the elections and ended up turning into very large anti-regime protests, and several people were killed in 2009. And it was a time when social media, we were just getting acquainted with platforms like Facebook. And so the footage coming out of Iran was very limited, and there's mass internet shutdowns to kind of repress and to hide what's happening inside of the country, what the IRGC does to the people during these protests. So fast forward from 2009, that protest was crushed. There was also several other protests in between. Fast forward to 2022, this is the first time we're getting a uncensored view of what's happening inside of the country. It's thanks to VPNs, it's thanks to smartphones, it's thanks to social media. We're able to actually see what's going on. And while there are internet outages, this is the first time we're really, really able to see what's happening. And if you followed what happened from 2022 to today in 2024, I mean, there was videos I saw that I was in shock. I actually tweeted about this last night. There was a young man who was laying on the streets. I believe he was injured, and the IRGC just walked up to him, started kicking him, violently attacking him, and they ended up shooting him. I remember I was sitting with my mom at the breakfast table. I at this time, I was staying up all hours of the night to track what was happening and follow what was happening inside of Iran. And I remember seeing that video and looking up from my phone in just disbelief. My face, I probably looked like I had seen a ghost. My mom looked at me. She said, "Are you okay?" I tried to speak and no words would come out. I just shook my head and just tears started streaming down my face, because I was sure that there was no way anyone could survive that level of brutality. And several days later, we actually found out that he survived. He had, in fact, survived. And now, fast forward to 2024, I just recently saw a photo of him, and he has a pretty big scar on the side of his face, and he had made like a little pendant necklace in the shape of the scar. And it was kind of a full circle moment for me because I had seen this violent attack on this young man. I believe he's 32 years old. And I had seen, the attack, I had seen his survival, and now I see his will to live, to survive, to keep fighting, to keep moving forward, and to tell his story despite all of the risks. And so these instances that we were able to see, it was the very first time we were able to follow these young people and their stories. And it just shows the resilience of the Iranian people. And while a lot of people claim that the 2022 uprising was largely crushed, I believe that, the Iranian people really are just getting started. And there's no way that this young generation of Iranians will be pushed down onto their knees. These young people are going to stand up to the regime, and they will die fighting for their freedom. We've seen it over and over and over again. There's just no way in my mind. People often ask me, "Do you actually think you're going to see a free Iran?" And I genuinely can say with full confidence that there's not a single doubt in my mind that this generation will overthrow this regime, because I just do not see, there's no fear in these people. They are resilient, they are strong, they are brave, and they're tired. They're fed up of living under this theocratic dictatorship. They talk about the fact that they can see the outside world. The social media thing I spoke about, where we can see inside of Iran, it goes both ways. They can see other countries. They see the lives that we live in the United States, and they want to live better lives. They want freedom, and they're very democratic minded people. You would think, after living for over 4 decades under the regime, that there wouldn't be a desire for freedom. They would just be conditioned to that lifestyle. But that's not how the youth is. The youth really wants to be free. They want to live how we do. The women don't want to cover their hair. There's so many different things that these people want and desire. And I know, with like every ounce of my being, I have no doubt that one day we will see freedom for Iran.
I love it. I'm with you. I have no doubt in my mind either. And I don't know if that means more or less, coming from somebody who I've really done minimal research. I mean, again, I took notes 2022. And I actually never even heard the argument that the uprising was crushed, because from my vantage point, it was a spark. It was more of like, hey, there's something starting here. So I've always seen it how you see it, but I'm not involved in that daily discourse of, was this crushed or not. I had no idea that was even part of the discourse. In my mind, it's always been, hey, something's starting here. And the more I looked into it, the happier I was to see that my own community of the Jewish community had taken root with it as well and started running with it. And there's been so much mutual support there, going back and forth, which I love to see, because when I studied American history, it seems that for one reason or another, I mean, it sounds conceited, but I don't mean it to be. We're a helpful ally to have, And I'm really happy that there's so many people in my community that have taken up that war cry, maybe not the right word, but that mantle as well. After when my family got here in the 40s to 60s, and there was involvement in civil rights movements and very big into women's rights here in America. Jewish communities very, very big on that. LGBTQ, it's all of those things. I was very happy to see that start transitioning outside the U.S. borders and outside of just Israel, because there is such a desire. Like it's so interesting on social media. The two of us connected, even just like to see how unified the messaging is, how unified it all of your voices, you're preaching the same message, and it is democracy, it is freedom, human rights, women's rights. I mean, I think it's the biggest women's rights movement on the planet. I think if you were to go around and ask, poll Earth, I think if you were to poll Earth, at least the western part of Earth, hey, what's the biggest women's rights movement going on right now? I mean, that would be the answer, and it's because of women like yourself that you saw what was happening, and you just a fire was lit, and you just decided, I'm going to do something. I need to do something, and yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing, truly. Like that, you just went from that moment with your dad to I have to do something. To you built a team, and now here you guys are in DC. You moved. Where were you from originally? I don't know if I caught that.
I'm from Dallas, Texas, originally.
Dallas, Texas. So yeah, you're from Dallas all the way to DC to pursue this. It's just amazing. And I'm so happy to have you here on Maker's Bar, because I can't think of a better leader, someone just, putting the rest of their life aside to go fight for what they believe in. Is truly, truly incredible. Well, yeah, so I'm loving hearing your story. It is really just wow.
Thank you. I mean, I totally agree. And it's very interesting because I would agree that, this is, one of the largest fights for women and human rights happening in modern history. And it's happening in the heart of the Middle East, in Iran, which I think a lot of people might be shocked by. But when you start to really dive in and look, you realize that the people of Iran are completely different than the occupying regime. They are nothing like the regime. In fact, they're the complete opposite. And I think for the longest time, there were people that conflated, and it was largely, I would say, because of the media, because of propagandists, because of so many different things. They conflated the Iranian people with the occupying regime. And oftentimes in the media, you'll hear Iran's bombing this, Iran's bombing that, Iran-backed proxy. And I think it's really important to make the distinction and to understand that, it's not the nation and the people, it's the regime that's occupying Iran that is doing these heinous and atrocious things. And I think that with the Jewish and Israeli community, the way we were able to bond from 2022 to now is because of our understanding of the dangers of the regime in Iran and its terrorist proxies. The Israeli people understand the threats living in close proximity to Hamas, Hezbollah, all of the regime's proxies. They understand that threat very well. And, on October 7th, a lot of the footage that I saw coming out of Israel was very reminiscent of the footage that I had seen coming out of Iran from 2022 and onwards. And it was really upsetting to see so many of the same tactics that the IRGC used to crush protests in Iran, to crush dissent, to crush the people's will, used on the Israeli people. And I remember waking up to seeing those horrifying images in Israel, young women, being kidnapped, babies, places burning on fire, homes burning on fire, and the brutality that we saw. I immediately knew. It didn't even take me not even 1 minute to immediately feel like I was called to speak out against the atrocious things that happened to the Israeli people on that day. I started tweeting. I believe it was like, some crazy hour. I had woken up really early that morning. I started tweeting at like 5, 6 a.m. And I was immediately like, this is awful what we're seeing happening in Israel. And it's all backed by the regime in Iran. And we've been warning. I remember in a lot of my meetings with my legislative advocacy, that was a huge topic of discussion, was Hamas, Hezbollah, the IRGC, and them all being linked together because Iran, the regime in Iran, is the largest state sponsor of terrorism. And so we were advocating, and we were not just advocating for, the freedom of the Iranian people and to be their voice, but we were also advocating for, the people of Israel and American national security interests. And it felt really bad to see, no one really taking that seriously. And then for October 7th to have to happen for lawmakers to kind of wake up. And I remember after October 7th, I was still living in Dallas at the time, but I had briefly come to DC for a conference. And I remember the discourse completely shifting on Capitol Hill. Suddenly there was an interest in knowing more about the regime in Iran, knowing more about its proxies, and actually understanding. And while it took, such tragedies to make that happen, it was kind of the silver lining, because I feel like it not only connected the Iranian and the Israeli people even more, but it got a lot of people to wake up, especially in those very early stages following October 7th. People were like, okay, this threat is very real. And so even, the hashtag Iranians stand with Israel, that ended up, being a very big hashtag on Twitter. A lot of people rallied, a lot of Iranians rallied around the Israeli people after October 7th. And I think that for some people, they were very shocked to see that. They were shocked to see Iranians, because that you see images out of Iran or videos rather, where the regime is burning Israeli and American flags, and there's this thought that it's the people of Iran doing that, but it's not. It's the regime security forces and the regime itself doing those things. Where the Iranian people the regime will paint Israeli and American flags on the ground, expecting people to step on them. You'll see the Iranian people jumping over or walking around. And so to really shed light on our collective voices and our stories, it became, I think that's kind of why I ended up becoming as involved as I did, because I just felt so called in so many different aspects and in so many different regards to really advocate. Not just like, this cause became so much bigger than just me. It was impacting so many other lives. And to be able to make those connections was truly very special.
Yeah, no, it really, really is. I've seen so many of the videos or examples of videos that you're talking about, and before even getting there, to go back to what you were saying before, there is a silver lining there of, okay, people are paying attention now, people are caring now, and again, there is so much credit to you and your group. Like, it was going to take a group of people to say, hey, enough's enough, we have to do something. You don't know what something is, but we're just going to take the first step, and then we'll see the next step, and we'll see the next step, and now you have a bill in the Senate, and I'm sure it's all going to go fantastically well, and I'm very excited to see that and keep up with it. But to your point, there was so much in common with Americans and Iranians, and when they're like, part of the discourse that's always bothered me. I mean, I started looking into this, specifically Israel and Palestine, but into the Middle East, I don't even know, years ago at this point, 5, 6 years ago, I started reading a ton and just really trying to be a part of the discourse. And one of the things that always bothered me once I really knew enough to start expanding that knowledge was that the way that the Middle East is talked about in America and in the West, and maybe this is because we're a very egocentric place, but you would think that the main problem is Israel and Palestine, or however your views on that go. When in actuality, I think in order for that part of the world to heal, like the main story is Iran and the Iranian people. And I really do believe that once how it comes about, I mean, there's so many moving pieces, but you are one of those large pieces that how that freedom comes about. Once that happens, I think you see that whole region start to heal.
Yeah.
It always, and the more I learn about the history of beyond just modern history, beyond our lives, the more about the history of the region, it does seem to be that was always back to times of Persia, and it it's made me happy to see people start to realize that when I have the conversation now, that not with everybody, but with so many people, that it's like, okay, well, we shouldn't even start here in the West. We need to move east. Like we need to start over here in Iran, the IRGC, and what happened in the 70s and the 80s. And so that starts to you do see that happening now, and it's thanks to social media, like you said. It's funny. My last guest I had on, he was talking about how great social media is. It's like, oh, it's funny you say that, because so many people, say how awful it is and all the problems it's causing, but it really is, since we're having these global conversations, it's
Right.
the global reach of it all. The fact that something that I didn't think about at all, because I always thought, until you said it, I always thought that, oh yeah, look what's happening in Iran. Like we can see this now. We have the proof. Like it's not just stories anymore. Like we know. And something I never thought about until you said it was, well, that's working the other way too. They're seeing the freedom that we're enjoying. They have access now to things that a lot of what I've seen, a lot of pictures and videos I've seen from pre 1980, uh, they get to see their own family's history at times,
Mhm.
and that has an effect too. And it it does truly all feel like it's building to something, and it's going to. I fully believe that we're going to see this regime fall, and we're going to see democracy and everything thrive in Iran. I think much of the world will heal through it. It's one of these topics that I obviously am not an expert on. However, the more I learn about it, the more important I realize it is, and I'm so happy to see people like yourself. I mean, yourself in particular. It's like so happy to see how Iranians have taken the promise of America and started to work within the framework of America to help their country. Because what I've seen with my people is when you come to this great country and you work within the framework, you can help your people, and then and over time, it takes decades, but over time, you start to see how it heals the world around you. You start to see how it brings people together around countries together all around you, and we've seen it with Ireland. Uh, we've seen it with Cuba, with embassies, not with embassies, with unions that they have with Cuban Americans. We see it with different groups. You really don't see it in the Middle East, until recent years, until yourself. And it's just so incredible. It's really truly incredible. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for coming on here. The more I get to talk to you, the more I'm just inspired. Truly. So thank you for coming on. But what do you see coming next? So we're talking about the future. We're talking about how this bill, earlier you said that this is just the start. What do you see coming next down the line for you, for your union, and for Iran?
Um, it's kind of a big question mark. I know the end goal, but the next steps. I don't really know. I don't know what's next for me. I hope it will be, setting roots down here in Washington, D.C., and, making this my home. I hope to see that. I believe being out here, as difficult and tiring as it can be at times, it's very important to have presence on the ground. And it can't just be, one, two, three, four people doing that. It has to be a lot more. And so I think getting young Iranian Americans out to Washington, even if it's just like what I was doing in 2023. I was traveling back and forth to and from. I think coming out to our nation's capital and engaging in your civic duties and in the legislative process is very, very important. And I'm very happy that, we have an organization like NUFTI, where we can be here and act as the voice of the Iranian American community. I think it's really important, and the team here is very, very young, and it's full of energy. And today, for example, we were on Capitol Hill, and I was in a senator's office, and someone walks in, and it's an Iranian American man that I know from Twitter, and he was advocating for the same things I was advocating for, and it just shows these offices, hey, look, this is not just one person, one organization, one small group of people. This is a broader community. So I hope to see more involvement from the Iranian American diaspora, from the Jewish community, and we can really band together and make something really great happen over time. So that's kind of personally what I see for myself, is just staying here in the nation's capital and advocating in the best way that I know how from the outside. Now, in terms of Iran, what do I think is next? I will say that there will be a continuation of protests on the streets. I believe that we will see that once again. Right now, we see a lot of civil disobedience. There's a lot of very, very outlandish laws in Iran that are in place by the regime. Most recently, we saw there was a group of university students that were graduating from college in what should have been one of the happiest days of their lives. They filmed a video singing and dancing, and instead of getting able to celebrate their graduation, now they could face legal repercussions just for singing, dancing, and riding a motorcycle. These young women are now in trouble for that. And the thing that it's very sad to see that type of repression on such a young, bright group of people. But the silver lining is that that's not going to stop them. And I can only imagine with time, we will see more and more and more and more Iranians will become braver and bolder and just ready to stand up and speak out. And I think that slowly, like you said earlier, we've lit the spark, and now we just have to really wait. And time will tell what will happen for the people of Iran. But ultimately, I believe that we will see freedom and democracy in Iran brought to you by the people of Iran. And so that's what I think will happen inside of Iran. And I think for the region at large, that will be, a godsend. It'll be so beneficial. We've seen what has happened in Israel, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, even, and so many other countries, Iraq, Yemen, where they have been completely war torn and torn apart by the IRGC. And I think that the missing key in all of this is the end of the warmongering that is perpetrated by the regime in Iran. And I think that the collapse of the Islamic regime will bring peace and prosperity to the region. And I don't just think that, I know that. So that's kind of my hopes for the future. Now, timeline, like I said, big question mark. And we just have to take it day by day and keep the hope alive and keep inspiring more and more people to get involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have the right mindset, and you've done so much already. It's amazing to see, because you wake up one day and like I woke up one day and I looked around for, okay, well, how can I be involved? How can I help with my community? And there's all these organizations, and I take it for granted. And I think you just kind of do. I mean, being American, we can take this whole country for granted at times, uh, and that wasn't there for you. And you did that didn't stop you. You said, hey, I'm going to go do something, and we're going to go help. We're going to get step by step, day by day. We don't know when, but we know the end. Like you said, you don't think you know. And I agree. I know this is coming. You can see it just within the people, within the unification of your message. And it's amazing. I love being able to follow people like yourself and just be able to learn about your diaspora and Iran, what's happening there, and the IRGC and everything. And uh, it's such an amazing fight, sad but amazing fight to watch and to be a part of. And I want to help every way I can, any way I can. Which right now I'm privileged enough to be a host here at Maker's Bar, and I'm going to use that to my full advantage. And you're welcome back whenever you want.
Thank you so much. It's been an incredible conversation, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity to speak about something that I'm so passionate about. It's really incredible, and it's just a testament, like I said, us being here together, the power of social media and unity and connection. We can do a lot if we set aside our differences, and even if we don't agree on everything, if we agree on most things, we should be able to come together, put those differences aside, and make a change to make a better and freer world for future generations to come. And it doesn't just stop at freedom for Iran, but freedom for the entire Middle East. And I know that we will see the day when that happens, and I cannot wait to see it. So thank you so much for having me on, and I hope that we can continue to collaborate and work together and share our collective messages for more and more people to hear.
Absolutely. You're welcome back on whenever. And actually, one of the things I'm really hoping to do here, I know I mentioned before we record for a second, one of the things I'm hoping to do here with this incredible privilege at Maker's Bar that I have is to hear more stories around the Middle East as well, and learn more and more about everything that's happening in the region instead of just to my family and friends, and to our neighbors and friends in Palestine. And hopefully that we can come together, and we're not ever going to agree on everything, but the more conversations we can have, the more that we realize we are alike. We do agree upon so much, and the more we can get done. And that's always the goal. And I, again, just so grateful to be able to follow you on Twitter and follow you now more so in real life. And I'll follow the bill and everything that's happening. And just very excited to see what's in the future. So Sarah, again, thank you so much for coming on, and I will talk to you soon, I'm sure.
Thank you so much.